Well, I think he's one of these people, it's like scoring a hat-trick in the World Cup or something, but very early on in his life he achieved this extraordinary thing. It's the highest ever tightrope walk in the history of, civilization. And he did other more official walks on the back of this, and still to this day is planning both legal and illegal walks. But this, I guess, I won't want to speak for him, how could I? But this, I think, was the pinnacle of his achievement, because it was illegal, it was successful, it was amazing, he became notorious and celebrated for it. So on the back of that, he was able to do more official walks, where people would pay for it and that kind of stuff. But this was his great final illegal walk, and what a walk it was. And the story is so amazing anyway, but in the context of what happened in New York later on and what happened to those buildings, the story becomes something very different. But the idea is to tell the story as it was, as opposed to trying to impose what became of those buildings on Philippe's story. So as someone who lived in New York for a long time and actually had the misfortune, like millions of other people, to witness those buildings collapse and be destroyed, and for many people to die in that horrible way. This felt like an interesting antidote, if a film can be an antidote to that, to the disaster. And therefore, I guess when you see the film, everyone has some interaction with the film on that basis. So it was the story and I guess what the story meant after 9/11 that was my motivation for making the film. Philippe had very strong ideas about how the film should be made, and had lots of ideas that really weren't appropriate to the film. And I guess like many people, they think they know films because they've seen films, but actually making the film is a very different process than watching it. So anyway, it was pretty tempestuous a lot of the time, and we kind of fought bitterly at certain points. So, for example, he did not want those Americans to be in the film, and we had a big fight about that and many other things. But that was a big conflict, whether they should be in the film. And he said, well, they betrayed me, how can they be in my film? I won't allow it, I forbid it. And I said, that's the very reason why they should be in your film, because they were part of this story and they betrayed you, and I insist upon it. So that was the nature of our collaboration. It was very antagonistic, and at the end of the process, Philippe really didn't like the film. He hated it and wanted to kill me. I use those words, I choose my words carefully. He really didn't want to kill me. And then, to his great credit, he saw the film at Sundance and saw that people responded very well to it, to his story being told in the way that I told it. And he immediately sort of forgave me for what I'd done. And up to this point, he was barely speaking to me. And that was very generous of him in a way. Because he said, you stole my story, you picked my pocket, you robbed me. And he then began to think that was quite a good thing after Sundance. So, but it was very interesting to work with someone who has such a different imagination than I have, and to have to, to be very sure of your own ideas, because if he's coming at you with other ideas and with negative thoughts about your ideas, you have to be very sure about them yourself. So in that respect, it was quite useful to have someone so antagonistically opposing everything I wanted to do. At the end of the film, as you saw, there was no moving footage of the main event of the story, which is he's going to walk on the wire, and there was no footage that exists of that walk, and that became a virtue, because if there had been footage, you would have all seen it a lot already. And because it was just photographs, they didn't have nearly as much currency in the world. So then I trusted those photographs, so that's all I had, but I really felt they had a power, that they caught the event in a very interesting kind of way, and also, in a sense, were true to what he did, which was to kind of stop time for the amount of time he's on that wire. That time seems to be irrelevant when you're doing what he was doing, and so the photographs capture that in a quite profound way. So definitely that was a preparation. Also, I guess, the use of reconstructions that are quite elaborate and quite scripted. In seeing the film, there was footage shot of Philippe's adventures at Notre Dame and at Sydney Harbour Bridge. And there was a film camera on the tower with Jean-Louis, his faithful friend, on the other tower. And as you saw, Jean-Louis, they lost the wire, and Jean-Louis spent hours, literally hours, pulling that very, very heavy cable in. And at the end of that, he literally could not pick up the 16mm camera. It was just too heavy. His arms had become sort of elasticated, and so he couldn't pick it up, and so he couldn't shoot the film. So in the first 2 shots he takes, stills are very out of focus because he's wobbling so much. So there was a camera there loaded with 16mm colour film, and it wasn't used. And by the time he got his strength back, the police had come, so he had to run for it. So that was why there wasn't film, even though they planned. And Philippe's very careful. You know, he knows his walks are ephemeral. They vanish after they're finished, and that's their beauty. But he wanted to record that walk and couldn't. And so ultimately, I think it helped the film not to have moving footage, because it would have been so familiar, I think, particularly in the light of the disaster that took place in 2001. So I was, in a sense, glad there wasn't footage. Motivation was to try and create some kind of alternative idea for those buildings that wasn't beholden to the people who destroyed them. And you know, what I found very upsetting on the back of 9/11 was firstly that the towers were defined by the act of destruction, not by the life they had before that, and the people who destroyed them basically owned their memory, and that really offended me very deeply, that the people who destroyed those buildings and killed people now owned those buildings. And so this was an attempt to say, fuck off, you don't own them. Yes. They can be owned by the imagination and by Philippe's, you know, artistic statement, yes. Which in so many ways is the opposite of what happened. So that was a very strong feeling, although none of those feelings are about the filmmaking. The filmmaking was about telling you this cheeky, mischievous, funny story as a heist movie, and it would have been very wrong to impose any kind of pompous morality onto that, and it would have been, you know, I think that kind of film would have offended me if it had been made by someone else and I was made to watch the towers falling down after seeing what Philippe had done. It would have enraged me, and therefore there was no way I was going to get into that. Also, I'd be disrespecting you, because you all have your own thoughts about what happened and what it meant and on and on. And so, much better that we have those thoughts privately. He loved the buildings and knew them in a way that almost no one else did. He spent so many hours and days in the back passages and the stairways. He breathed and knew how they sounded. And so he had a sensual connection to the buildings that many people wouldn't have had. And again, I wouldn't want to speak for him. He speaks so well for himself, but I do know when we talked about it a little bit that he felt something inside him had died. And right, you know, that was his view, notwithstanding the loss of life and how terrible we all felt about that. Simple what Philippe did, he was friends with the world's greatest juggler, a man called Francis Brune, who really is the world's greatest juggler. And you can go on YouTube and see this man, and he's the world's greatest juggler. And Francis was successful and had money, so Philippe took this trip from Paris to Germany, where Francis was performing in a circus, and just begged him for some money to do it. And so Francis gave him a suitcase full of German marks. And he then went back to Paris. He got bitten by a dog on the way back, and then went back to New York and paid for, you know, his living expenses and the people around him. So it's very. But I cut it out for reasons of efficiency. But got asked that question a lot when the film was released, particularly in America. You know, how did they survive? What were they doing? Also, Philippe used to perform in the street and pass his hat around, and make small money that way. And still has plans to do more walks. He teaches, you know, his life philosophy, believe it or not, and that's how he makes a living.